Justin, thanks for joining me today. Like, I'm super pumped to dive in. Give me like a quick intro into you, Justin. You've got quite an incredible story. Let's
Thanks.
start
Yeah.
there.
I mean, I never know what to say in these kind of intros. I guess
Sure.
the easiest thing is to say, so I coach, solopreneurs, business owners, mainly to manage overwhelm. And that kind of saying that I help them manage overwhelm is to say that I'm a thinker and I'm quite a complex thinker, and I like elegant mental solutions as opposed to like brute force, just do it, like those kinds of things. I prefer strategy. So I'm a strategist. I think that's a good way to say it.
Yeah. And when we had officially, first started talking on Matchmaker, like, I think what really, I just have a profound sense of respect. And again, respect doesn't even cover it. There's something like almost ancient about it. Like, I just have this respect and love and appreciation for people who have been on the brink as you have, but have also made their way back. Tell me about that. There was, some severe depression going on, but now you're here, you're full of life, you're full of love and energy, like how do you make that transition? Like, and how long did it take? What did you have to do from going, I guess, from the dark to the light?
Yeah. It's interesting because, like what you're referencing is when I was 17, I tried to take my own life. And again, when I was 20, I tried to take my own life in very, different ways. And both times landed me embarrassingly in front of other people and being, like seen. And the more I've understood it over time, like that darkness came from a place where it's what are called collective illusions. If you want to check out standtogether.org, they've got a YouTube channel and they talk about this, where what we think other people collectively believe and therefore what do we do and what do we believe really shapes us. And transparent, clear communication really destroys all of that. So growing up in South Africa, I believed that I needed to, go to university, get a job, that girls would only like me if I had a car, which I didn't, of course. And that
Sure.
if I wasn't like ripped and cut, and if I wasn't like tanned, I like, if anyone's just hearing my voice and not able to see me, like I am pale, I'm of Irish descent. I've got that very pale white skin.
Sure.
And, learning how to own that and just be like, yeah, I'm a vampire, and then laugh at it as people kind of talk, so it's fine. But, the collective kind of illusion is that to be successful, you need to follow this kind of deferred life path. And what happened is after my second suicide attempt, I was like, you know what, I'm done with this. If this is where I'm at, I'm going to be a loser, and I'm just going to go where the wind takes me, and I'm going to be the best loser ever, and I'm just going to go and explore the world. And that's literally what I did. Within 6 months, I left South Africa, and I was, I was in England, and had no idea what I was doing. I landed with like 100 pounds, like what, $150 in my pocket, and like everything I owned on my back, and just went from there. And I've traveled the world. I've lived in 7 countries for over a year at a time, and the US now is the 8th. And it's just kind of grown from there. And I think that's the beautiful thing, is seeing that every single country has their own deferred life path. And
it's so interesting.
It's really weird, and I can tell you some cool stories. But the simple point is that realizing that, number one, there's this collective illusion out there of like what you should be doing. And then number two is like, you know what? If what you're doing makes you happy, you're more than likely going to be adding value to another person as well. And that's ultimately what good, fulfilling life is all about, is, being passionate about yourself and, giving value to others.
So I'm super curious, now that you've been in the US for a little bit of time, what's maybe the most contrasting culture, that deferred life plan? What's maybe the one that's in most severe contrast to that of the American, white picket fence, dream house,
Yeah. I think, the one that just pops into my mind randomly without, much thought, I'm sure an hour from now, I'm going to be like, oh, I should have said this.
Right.
But, like that's fine. Upon second thoughts, third thoughts, we iterate our thoughts. But the first one that pops up to me is the French culture, to be honest with you, or maybe the Italians, where,
Interesting.
the deferred life plan is just about, it's not about like this great job, or like studying hard or being seen as some kind of like accomplishment in the eyes of others, but it's more along the line of living well. So my Italian friends used to take hours to cook a meal with pride, but then also they would take an hour to sit and devour that meal slowly and surely, and taking pride in what ingredients they chose. And it was weird. And I mean, we're talking about people who didn't necessarily have any money, but they grew their own tomatoes. And then the way that they
Yeah.
prepared those tomatoes, were like, it
Yeah.
was just incredible. So like that, I think, and you can't live a white picket fence dream life in those countries because it doesn't exist. It doesn't. Suburbs don't exist in the same way. You do get villages, but they're usually poorer, run down, so you tend to grow your own food. So it tends to be based around food quality. It tends to be based on like pride of your process, really,
Yeah.
your connections, your family. It's so strong there. So there's so many things. But as I
Super
say that, I'm
interesting.
like, I'm sure there are people in the US, like I'm sure you take pride in a lot
Sure.
of your food and
Yeah.
family
I actually
connections
love
and
cooking.
community.
I
Yeah.
love cooking. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess it's just like the different value hierarchies,
Exactly.
where it's like here in the US, I totally recognize like we're so individualistic, right? It's all about the success of the individual, not necessarily about, even though there's a great deal of nationalism, right? There's a great deal of patriotism.
Yeah.
It definitely is like, it's the individual, right? To
Without a
rise
doubt.
above all else and succeed. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
So you land in the UK with like $150 in your pocket, 100 pounds.
Yeah.
How the hell do you survive? Justin, how the hell do you do that? Like I've heard, that story is definitely unique. Like very, very few people actually do that. Like walk me through day one in the UK. $150. Are you sleeping on the street? Are you checking into a hostel? Like what are you doing there?
No, thankfully, and this is quite interesting. It's the myth of the self-made man, or the myth of the
Ooh, yeah.
single genius. It's like, it's usually a load of like bull dust. There's no such
Sure.
thing as a self-made man, or like a genius. There's always a group of people. And
Yeah.
so for me, like I had 3 people that I knew, and
Okay.
one of them, thankfully, at the last minute decided he was going to come collect me from the airport.
Awesome.
And if I was borderline in tears, I was ready to like fall on the floor and start crying, because I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no idea how to even navigate from the airport. Like, I mean, I've never seen a train, let alone been on a train. And I had to take a train from the airport to somewhere, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So my friend thankfully picked me up, and for 3 days I stayed on the floor, literally in his bedroom on the floor. And when he wasn't working, he was showing me the ropes. And then literally in 3 days, got a position in one of those places where they're like, okay, if you work for us, we'll give you accommodation, and we take a percentage of your salary. Yeah, so that's it. So I stayed there for 3 months and just built up a little bit of money, a little bit of confidence, and then from there moved. Next thing, iterate. So it's just an iterative process, where you just go with what you got, and then you build and you build and you build. And eventually, I was washing dishes for Princess Diana's family in their house next to Buckingham Palace.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was random. And and I chose that over working in casinos as well, because I used to be a croupier.
Okay.
So
interesting. So this is just months after your second suicide attempt. How did all those experiences help you, or did they help you? I guess that's the main question. Did that kind of new adventure, that new journey where you're learning, growing, adapting, did that help you in your journey to where you are now? And if it did, how big of a role did it play?
Well, let me hit on something you just said, which is, like the suicide attempts. Like, how did I unpack that? At one point in time, I spoke to someone, like there was a psychic that people in my family were going to like pay a ton of money for. And personally, like, I don't believe in a lot of the psychics that are out there, like there's cold reading and stuff like that. It's very hard to kind of
absolutely
argue that. But regardless, I went anyway. Like my brother paid for me to go and see this woman. And And I just thought, you know what, like, I don't care about it. Let me just go and have a conversation. It's free, fine. And
Yeah.
she gave some great advice and she gave some great insights. And that's what I took away from it, is just like having a conversation with a really insightful person. And she said to me, you should wear the suicide as a medal of honor, because you'll be surprised about how many people feel the same way. And
Mm,
that's what I did. Like, I didn't back down from, get ashamed or embarrassed about that fact. I'm like, this is what happened. This is what I did to myself. And unpacking that over time, understanding how much aggression there was, and anger and frustration, and elevating those emotions, from anger to something more constructive, took a decade. It took like 10 years, you
sure.
know. I'm 41 this year. And I must say, until the age of like 33, I was not a pleasant person to be around.
Interesting.
But I still had this idea of like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do
Yeah.
this despite what anyone else says. Just, go out into the world, live my life, and do what I want, and fly in the face of everything that anyone says. So if anyone told
Mm,
me I couldn't do something, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it, even if I
sure.
fail, just to spite you, and it's
Sure.
a stupid way to be, but that's what the emotion dictates. And I think one of the biggest things is learning how to dissolve those emotions has been one of the biggest things that I've ever learned, is
Yeah.
how can I sidestep that? How can I do some, like, emotional mental kung fu to kind of like flow with it,
How did you learn to do that for yourself?
with the emotional mental kung fu.
Yeah, and I really like the term you just used, to dissolve those emotions. Where,
Hmm.
where do you learn to do that? How did you learn to do that on your journey, Justin?
Uh, I made friends. I think that one of the biggest starting points was I made friends with a Tibetan Buddhist monk in London. Yeah,
Wow.
just randomly, I saw him
Just
working in a bookstore. He's working in a bookstore, and I'm like, but you're a monk. He's like, I'm doing a favor for a friend. I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool, And then we started
sure.
hanging out together, and going for like a walk every now and again. And he was a really, really, really nice guy, and he recommended a book called the 8 Steps to Happiness by Geshe Kelsing Pao Rinpoche. All right.
Wow.
So reading that book and just like trying to understand a little bit more about like what life offers,
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff, and just starting those questions and then unraveling that as I traveled. Like when I lived in Indonesia, I was friends with a guy who was an imam in a mosque there, and actually had lost faith, and he stepped away from the Islamic faith, which is a big deal. And even though he still believed, he'd never practiced it in the same way again. And having those kinds of conversations with him too. And then realizing that like everybody's got these set old traditional structures of thinking about it. And so what I did is like, we're talking
What's it?
7.
Define it for me. Thinking about emotions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thinking about how to process life.
Okay.
Like, you know, is anger justifiable? Is
Yeah.
anger something necessary? Like what's honor? Like, is honor something that's built into humans? Is this something that, and asking those kinds of questions, I eventually got to a place where I'm like, let me wipe the board clean and just
Mm.
observe human behavior and take a look at it for myself. And so like from there, and being able to observe, and with, let's say, eyes unclouded, starting to look at how humans interact, how humans behave. And that's when I started getting into like a lot of research and being able to interpret the research in those ways based on like, well, what can I see people doing? And a lot of the times it's, we get angry at ourselves and we get frustrated because needs aren't being met. So like, yeah, let's just say it took a decade to be able to really get to that point of
Yeah.
dissolving a lot of those emotions.
When
And
you were 17 and 20, Justin, during those dark times, what needs weren't being met for you?
oh, loads, yeah. So there's an institute called the Human Givens in the UK, and they
Yeah.
talk about 9 emotional needs.
Yeah.
And so like the first and foremost is a safe environment. And I would say that wasn't being met because, my family were arguing all the time, constantly. So I didn't feel like, like if I was able to make a mistake, I wouldn't be punished for it. That's a safe environment as well. Like safe to
Mm.
experiment, safe to
Yeah.
be
Not
who
just
you
physical
are.
safety, emotional and
Yeah,
mental safety as well. Yeah.
exactly. So I don't think that was necessarily being met, but it's not faults of my parents aren't terrible people or anything like that. They're lovely people. It's just, like my mom was born right after World War II in the UK. And so, she grew up with rationing and stuff like that. My dad grew up so poor. He had one pair of trousers until he was like 17, 18, that kind of stuff. So, these are just normal people, but most people aren't sensitive enough to those kinds of psychological needs. Why? Well, because physical needs need to be met first, because they were like, you've got a roof over your head, you've got food in your belly, you have absolutely no existential threats, you've got no war on your doorstep. Like, what are you doing? So, psychological needs, like in terms of that. But then I think I just felt very alone as well. I didn't have community, I didn't have friendships, and that was a big deal. Yeah. So I think those are big things. Yeah.
So as you learned that those were, how long did it take you to come to that realization that that's what you were missing?
Probably
a long time.
I think I was about 20, 29, 30 before I realized, like, this is what
that's the missing link.
This is what I really want. I want to feel like a sense of camaraderie, a sense of togetherness and belonging to a community. And that belonging is a big deal. Like, I always had friends, which is fine, but I never felt like I belonged to those groups. And I was looking for markers that they were somehow signaling belonging, but I was looking for them to signal it in the ways that I wanted to. So for example, like if they didn't invite me, I was like, well, they clearly don't want me there. But actually, they just didn't invite anyone. They were just this loosey-goosey kind of group of people, and so this is a big deal, is how do you marry what's going on in reality and make sure that it's not about you. And it's 99% of what I say. It's like, whatever's going on in your head, the biggest thing is that you're making it about you, where it's probably not about you. Like that person who just cut you off in front of you on the road probably didn't think, well, fuck this guy. Pardon, sorry, I don't know if I can swear.
No, fuck,
but like,
say it. No, we're good.
Yeah, like cut in front of you and say, fuck this guy, man, I'm taking, most people don't operate like that. What they operate in is like, oh my gosh, I really need to get to this other place. And whoops, I just cut that person off. I hope they don't mind.
Yeah.
They don't think about others. And so largely, most people are just thinking about themselves. So anything that happens to you is largely not because of who you are. And so we create those stories because we want to feel valuable. So it's because of me, isn't it? And getting rid of that in that perspective is largely how to dissolve a lot of those emotions. Oh, I'm reacting to this. Why? Well, because they said this about me. Is it about me? Do they really know me? Do I upset them that much? Probably not. It's probably got to do with something that they experienced in childhood. Emotion gone, all of a sudden there's a lot more compassion. What happened to that person in childhood? Their needs weren't met. Oh, okay. Well, let me see if I can help them calm down, give them what they need right now, even if that's space and me to go away. And it's amazing how much that kind of stuff gives you breathing room in your mind to just be calm and peaceful.
So when we had talked the other day, you brought up this amazing concept of progressive underload.
Yeah.
Underload. Okay. So progressive overload, for all the gym junkies out there, like you're going to know what that is. Like my last 6-7 years of my life dedicated to the gym, progressive overload is my best friend ever. Okay. When we spoke though, you asked, have I ever heard of progressive underload? Walk me through how this applies physically, and then walk me through how this applies mentally and emotionally. Because I am a firm believer that the body is modeled after the mind and vice versa. Mm-hmm. They operate very, very similarly, right? Mm-hmm. So walk me through this idea of progressive underload. One, physically, just how someone might practice progressive underload in the gym or in their health or fitness or whatever, and then talk to me how that applies mentally and emotionally.
All right, let me okay, I've got an order sequence that I've got. Okay, cool. So obviously, just to be clear about terms and things like that, if you want to grow your muscles, then progressive overload is the idea of a certain amount of stimulus allows you to create a stress response called hormesis. And the stress response means adaptation. Fantastic. Now, what usually happens is, in this case, progressive overload leads to a lot of things being inflexible as well. And so flexibility is a big deal if we're talking about the body. So think about like power lifters, weightlifters, like very big bodybuilders as well. They tend to not be very flexible. It's very rare to see someone like that who can, I don't know, touch the middle of their own back,
That's me,
touch their
by the way,
toes,
for
things
sure.
like that.
That's for
Right.
sure.
And
I'm not
it's
that big, but I've paid almost zero attention to flexibility. It's something I'm trying to correct.
Such a big deal. And what's interesting as a side tangent is to look at this, like I'm very much organized around longevity. How do I live a long, fulfilling life? So perhaps lifespan is not the word that's used to describe this, but people talk about this with regard to the vocabulary health span. What is your health span? What's the span of your life that you're going to be healthy? And from everything that I can tell, if we're talking about like the different things within exercise and simplify it down to, you've got flexibility training, you've got cardio, and you've got resistance training. Resistance training, absolutely. It's not saying that any of these are unimportant. They're all super important, but in terms of an order condescendi, which one is going to be the one that takes you to absolute health span? And from what I can tell, it's flexibility. Cardio absolutely plays a great part in it. You see the more pro bodybuilders and powerlifters go, like they tend to die younger as well because of the strain on the heart, right? If you look at like triathletes and things like that, because of the musculature, it usually means that they don't have the musculature to support like good frames, good strength movements, things like that, but they got great cardio. Fantastic. So there's definitely a piece together there. But flexibility training usually means there's at least a degree of tension in your muscles. There's a degree of endurance in terms of like muscular capacity endurance. So flexibility is a major deal. So going back to that, progressive overload gets you bigger muscles, stronger muscles. And then with regard to flexibility, if I choose to go into like a toe touch position and I pick up, let's say 60 pounds of weight, it's going to pull me further down than I can go. My muscles are going to get to a point where they're going to resist back as well. So there's a lot of people who believe that, progressive overload or using weights with stretching is a bad idea. But consider that it does pull you a little bit further. So being mindful and moderate with your weight loads is important.
60 pounds may be a lot, but grabbing 10, 15 pounds, yeah, that's perfect.
And then even then, so then the question is like, well, do you always want that 10 or 15 pounds every time you want to touch your toes? Well, no, I want to get there on my own without assistance. So progressive underload is basically the concept of how do I remove the assistance? How do I remove the assistance by taking myself to that place, getting more familiar with that place, more familiar in that domain, so that my body actually then is able to take me there without so much assistance, maybe, progressively underloading so that we get to minimal assistance and then zero assistance. So we're able to get into a toe touch position. Why? Because our body is open and our muscles will allow us to go into those positions. So of course, I'm not like a licensed physical trainer or anything like that. Please don't take any of my advice. Go check out people. I've got a coach for flexibility. If you go and check him out on Instagram, his name is Joachim Gildersen from Belgium. And he is probably the best thinker in the space that I have seen. There's tons of other guys. Flexibility.
We'll probably have to spell out that name below.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so if you just search the Jack Rousseau method, because people obviously were like, how do you say that name? What? And they were having difficulty. So he just said, Jack, just call me Jack. And he thought Jack Rousseau was like a famous person. It turns out he was wrong. It's not a celebrity. So he just called his method the Jack Rousseau method. And that's pretty cool. And he's phenomenal. And so progressive underload is this concept of how do I do something with less and less assistance? So if you consider you're trying to achieve your goals, how do we utilize that with progressive underload or overload, right? So when we are training things that we're uncomfortable with, we should be using progressive overload in terms of like challenging ourselves with just +1 stress. So if you've never done an ice plunge before, a cold plunge, then just getting your legs in comfortably and you're satisfied with that result, get out. Next time you come back, cool, let's go into the waist. Cool. The next time you come back, let's go into the nipples. Next time you come back, let's go into the shoulders. Next time you come back, let's go in all the way. And then we can also increase the domain that we're there for, so like all right, let's go in and let's stay for a minute. Next time, 2 minutes. Next time, 3 minutes. That's progressive overload as we're expressing. Now, with regard to the mental training, I'm sure with anyone who's experienced an ice plunge, the idea is that it's tough because you got to sit in this suck. It really sucks for a lot of people. And so part of what I did a couple of years ago was actually walk people through 25-minute ice plunge, sessions where they just sit in the ice for 25 minutes at a time. But we take like 5 minutes to get in, and it's all calm, cool, collected. And it's this idea of overcoming that response of get me out of here, get me out of here, get me out of here. And just calming the mind down and seeing the mind that's going like crazy as a separate version of yourself that's just reacting and responsive. And then there's a comforting, calming side to yourself as well. And in this case, we learn how to comfort ourselves, which is a skill that we need to learn emotionally. How do we comfort ourselves instead of expecting our mothers or partners to be there kind of stroking our head, being like, it's okay, it's okay. You can do this for yourself. You can literally comfort yourself in times where you're super stressed.
Sure. So with your clients, how do you practice this underload then? So for the ice plunge, then like you're maybe like doing it with them, and then are you like 5 feet away cheering them on? And then like 10 feet away, and then 20, and then pretty soon you're just sending a text right beforehand. You're like, hey, good job, Buckaroo. Have a great 25 minutes, right? Exactly. So how do we do that to ourselves? Or do we even do that to ourselves, or do we ask for external? Do we ask our partners to initially apply a super, super heavy pressure? Do we go on one of those websites where you give them $500, and if you don't accomplish this thing by a certain date, then they get to keep the money, and then it's 400, 300, 200, 150, 25. How do we actually practice this?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and you pretty much nailed it on the head with regard to the underload part of it. So the overload part is easy to understand. We progressively get more and more intense, and we increase our tolerance range. And the underload is really connected with motivation. It's connected with, well, how much assistance do you need to happily go into this unpleasant domain? And how do you transform that unpleasant into something that you get excited about because you're like, I know this is going to challenge me. And that's quite a gap to breach. And so like you're saying, we've got the carrot or the stick. Literally, stick with 2ks.com is a website where you put money into escrow, where you're like, if I don't do this thing, and you've got someone watching you and they're like, if you don't do this thing, I get the money, or it gets donated to someone that you hate or something like that. And
some foundation that you can't stand.
Exactly. And like Tim Ferriss made this very popular in his book, 4-Hour Chef. And it's a good way to get motivated. But the thing is that it's large assistance. There's pain, there's suffering attached to that if you fail as well. So it doesn't necessarily promote failure and iterations as well. It gives you a large sting with failure. So, for me, I really don't like that. I really don't like that. I don't think that we should be associating anything negative with failure. Like, yes, we do need to accomplish goals, but goals should be byproducts of a process. And so what I like to do is rather take it down a notch with regard to our progressive overload. Like, it's not like get to these major points, and progressively underloading things is more about how much we can automate them, how much they can become automatic. And then let's attach our emotions to it as well. And how much can we change all of our emotions about this thing into excitement, into accomplishment? And so pride comes out of that accomplishment. So, Dr. Barbara Fredrickson out of University of Florida, don't quote me on that. She's got something called the broaden and build theory, and basically summarizes it in terms of like, you can lead fulfilling lives if you promote four emotions, right? Curiosity, joy, appreciation, savoring, and sharing. And so the idea is that if you can approach anything that you're doing with those 4 emotions, slowly but surely, we can take away the assistance of the goal setting, the punishments, or things like that. We can shift into this mindset of, first of all, it's automated. And second of all, it's then coming from a source of motivation that's something that you find fulfilling, which is, let's say, curiosity. What can I do next time? Joy, like, I enjoyed that. It was a lot of pleasure. There's a little bit of competition. I didn't care who won, competing with yourself, but not caring who won. So like, the next time I go out for my 5K run, I'm going to try and beat my time. or beat
Yeah.
my pace or whatever, but I don't care if I do or if I don't, because I'm still going to do it 10 years from now.
Mm.
It's still part of the process, and the results are a byproduct. But then after 3 months, what have you accomplished just by being and spending more time in that domain? What have you accomplished? Probably like a ton of stuff that you're proud of, and you're probably going to share it, and probably going to be like,
Yeah.
just like you did when your kid popped out, and you're like, "This is mine. I made
Yeah.
this. Look, everybody!"
Absolutely.
Like sharing your dog on Facebook and be like,
I mean,
"Look at my
I
dog."
didn't make it. I just assisted, but yeah, no, I understand the point. So Justin, super interesting that we've kind of veered onto this topic of the process. So I would say in my life right now, this is the greatest struggle that I personally run into. And after spending a lot of time thinking about it, spending a lot of time going to therapy, talking with the therapist, just trying to understand the bullshit inside my own head. This is like my great struggle. There's really only one thing in my whole life that I have learned to just love the process of doing, and that's actually weightlifting. Interestingly enough, like that's like the one thing. I have an extremely difficult time just loving what I'm doing in the moment I'm doing it. I can almost never detach myself from the result of something. Almost ever. I can only ever think about the possible rejection, the possible approval, the possible money to be made. Like there is almost zero detachment for me personally between the process and the end goal. And I definitely feel like I'm turning a corner with it, after spending so much time understanding where it comes from in my childhood, why I have this, and what I need to do to overcome it. But talk to me how you overcome that with some of your clients, how you did that for yourself. And that's a totally selfish question, right? But
totally,
it's like, it's
that's
my
true.
life's greatest struggle. I just can't detach the outcome. I can't detach from it.
Yeah. Well, not yet.
Not
so
yet.
consider
Not yet. Yes.
let's talk about this for a second. So you got like 4 types of information, right? You've got knowledge information, like you read a book, and so you read a book about how to do a push-up, so now you've got the knowledge. You got process information, which is you practicing. So you practice doing push-ups. You got experience information, which is literally you living through something like, let's say, living through the pressures of like a military boot camp where you have to do so many push-ups that you puke, and so like that's not practicing for push-ups, that's just surviving an experience. And then there's a place that you can get to if you take that skill to the extreme where you become a master and you're like a teacher, and you can appropriately assign the right push-up protocols and the right tweaks and everything to a person, and you can diagnose their weaknesses, their strengths, etc. It's called agent arena knowledge. And so those are the 4 types of knowledge. And so when we're talking about this, like number 1, in my opinion, is starting with that abstract knowledge. And when it comes to things like this, what we're talking about is the mental frame that you have around what are results and what do results mean. So it doesn't mean that we have to stop participating in any way with what we're doing in life. So your weightlifting is never going to change, but your attitude toward it will change. So like one of the biggest things is, the mentality around, I will allow myself to be happy and to cheer myself on once I deadlift 250 pounds or something like that, right? But the concept is that you're saying that 99% of your time, until you achieve that one result, 99% of your time is going to be struggle. And a quick question for you is like, do you want to live in struggle? So people are like, no, of course. So, okay, how do we change that? How do we change that? So the first things first is to understand that you've got a mental framework around valuing a result. Cool. That doesn't mean that we can't reach a result. But what I usually do with people is shift it around and say, what's important is skill development. If you pick up that 250-pound weight, deadlifting it one time, was that luck or was that skill? Was that a developed ability or was that just a fluke? And so do it 10 times, do it 100 times. And if you can do it 10 to 100 times, you've demonstrated great skill. And so the question then becomes like, okay, cool. Well, every time you go in the gym and you're deadlifting, you're thinking about, how do I improve my skill so that when I get there to 250, it's not just because I'm wearing, all the bracing equipment on my knees, I'm wearing my lifting belt, smelling salts and fucking hype myself up, and my lifting buddy is slapping my back so hard, like my eyeballs are popping out my face. It's none of that. What skills do you value? So maybe if you're someone who values like the raw strength of human ability, you're not going to try and push to the highest limits, but you're rather going to go, well, how long can I lift raw, and how far can I go without a lifting belt? And that's learning how to brace properly. So I'm talking, like obviously like heavy lifting right now, but I mean, we can get into this with calisthenics, any gymnastics kind of stuff. We can get into this with bodybuilding. If you focus on like mind muscle connection is very much a skill where you can increase your
Absolutely,
ability
it is. Yeah.
to feel the sensitivity of the muscle as well. And likewise, when you're talking about, like doing body weight training, being aware of, let's say, 3 points of your body, so that you've always got, a body awareness, type of body sense. I can't remember what the proper term is, but the concept there.
Proprioception.
There we go. Yeah. Your physical proprioception is the idea of paying attention to with calisthenics, usually because it's a closed chain exercise. So anyway, just going back to the point, it's the idea of skill development. And there are certain days where your skills are going to diminish slightly because they're impacted by food, they're impacted by your emotional state, they're impacted by sleep, etc. But if you track it over a long enough timeline, you're going to see a general trend increasing in skills. And if you don't, I would be worried. I would be worried if your skills over time do not increase. That's when we start to have issues, and we investigate ego. Like how much do you need to be this person? And it's not because you've got a sense of self-worth, it's because you're showing others, look at how valuable I am, look at how much I can lift, that kind of stuff. And so it comes down to one of those 9 emotional needs that I talked about earlier is agency. How much control do we feel we have over our own lives? And so that's why you get a lot of people going to physical exercise as a means of control, because it is something that actually we can control, and our body responds to the stimulus very well. And so we get a skill of attaining control. But then taking to the extreme, you get body dysmorphia, you get gym rats, you get people who just live in the gym, but then their food looks like shit, or their sleep looks like shit, or they'll jack themselves up on pre-workout. Like, that's not health. That's just how much control can I assert over myself?
Yeah.
And so investigating those deep emotional things, that's point 1. What do we want for the future as well? So if I ask you right now, Andrew, like the future version of yourself, let's say in 5 years' time. Okay, let's go for ideal Andrew right now. Okay, what skills does ideal Andrew have emotionally, mentally, physically? It doesn't matter. Like, name the top 3 that just come into your head. Like, if future Andrew was transported back into this moment and he went lifting with you and he lived the entire day with you, what things that you're struggling with now would he absolutely have no trouble with? As a matter of fact, he'd probably give you advice on how to deal with it and be like, listen, Boss Andrew, you need to chill out. Like, this is not a big deal. Or, why
I
don't
probably do need to chill out. I probably do to some degree, right? That's super interesting. And I love that we're comparing this to kind of weightlifting, bodybuilding because that's definitely one of my great passions. So actually, for a time, I was creating like workout content for TikTok around bodybuilding and weightlifting. And I actually noticed this super interesting thing started to happen. I was now starting to lift to look great on video. I was trying to eat healthy, or trying to lose weight and cut weight, again, for the TikTok videos, to gain a certain aesthetic. And it actually took the one thing in my life that I loved doing just for the sake of doing and turned it into an outcome-based bullshit.
Yeah.
And I actually, it got to a point where I noticed, like, I told myself, like, crap, I don't feel like going to the gym. And that was like a new feeling for me. Like
Mm.
I hadn't experienced that feeling in a long, 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 long time. And it actually hurt me. Like it hurt me a little bit.
Yeah.
So I shut down the TikTok, didn't stop making videos. And almost immediately it was like, oh, sick. I'm back at the gym, baby. Just because I freaking loved it, right?
Right on.
So it's just, my great struggle. Like, how do I just love what I'm doing
Well,
in the
let's take
moment?
that example very quickly.
Yeah.
Consider the skill of being able to catch yourself saying, wait a minute, I'm finding myself doing this for a result rather than for anything else.
Yeah.
How do you reorientate yourself? So imagine you're walking around in the woods or mountains, you're hiking, you got a map, you got a compass, and you realize that you're lost. How do you reorientate yourself? How do you get your bearings? And so it's literally this idea of like, stop and take inventory lists of everything. And we need a program in like, this is one of the biggest things that I can promote for most people is actually planning days, like once a quarter, to sit down and ask, let me track my past actions, let me track my pleasure, let me track everything, and make sure that I'm on track to hit like long-term goals. Well, what are my long-term goals? Well, I just want to be healthy. That's a long-term goal. Well, what results am I measuring with this? Well, how do I feel in my body? What foods am I eating? So they're consistent practices rather than a particular result. Like, so we can dig into this as well. And this is another answer to how do I get less results focused, goal focused? And it's the idea of like, well, if you want your body to look good, you can eat less food as well. But, the idea is, well, which muscles am I taking care of? What's the shape that I want to create out of my body, without losing other things as well. So, just taking stock of a general kind of thing, and just finding pleasure in going to the gym every day. So where's your pleasure? Regardless of your results, are you enjoying feeling your body? And then, making sure that the results are secondary, not primary. The primary thing is you're going to the gym to feel good. Great. And then the secondary thing is, what are the results? And so in this moment where you realize that you're doing everything for the results so that TikTok gets better, because there's a lot of validation, there's a lot of accomplishments that recognize when your TikTok video goes viral. And we call that vanity metrics as well.
Yes. Yeah. I obsess over them. Obsess.
And
Justin,
I've got friends
unhealthy.
that can't even get on social media because they just keep checking their analytics, or so I've got a couple of friends who are YouTubers, and they say they can't actually be the one who pushes upload on their YouTube videos because they'll constantly be refreshing and checking their analytics on YouTube the entire time. And so this is a good example.
The moment I can make any money or whatever, I think my first expense will be a virtual assistant that handles my YouTube, and I'm not allowed to go in and look at the metrics.
Right.
I may have to. I'm definitely that person that's like, hold on, babe.
Okay.
Let me go refresh my.
This is a perfect example of progressive underload, because right now you need a lot of assistance to be able to manage these emotions.
There it is. Yes.
Yeah. Right. And so, like, how can you increase your skill at being able to moderate this? And a lot of it is reminding yourself, how much does this matter? Does the metrics of this one video or the metrics today versus in 5 years' time, you're going to have been through like ups and downs and all kinds of stuff. And so it's really about that. The long-term views usually negate the small little problems that we're feeling today. And so those long-term views usually help us. So stopping, and I call it a taking stock, taking inventory, like I said before, getting your bearings, or like reorientating yourself, literally stopping and just saying, where the hell am I? Where am I going? So if you started up a TikTok channel just for you, and your profile is just for you, and you've got no other purpose to it, then that's fine. And if later on there becomes a purpose, then that's fine. But reminding yourself that I have no purpose for this except for whatever the hell I want to do with it. And then asking yourself those questions. What do I want to do? Are my actions taking me to what I want to do, or creating an obligation for me? That's a big deal, So it's not about like, as soon as temptation comes in, like smacking it down, closing the TikTok, things like that. It's like finding, how can I do this without feeling these things? Well, what do I want to achieve with this in the first place? And to be honest with you, that's 99% of people. We take this, like we talked about before, this deferred life plan that everyone gets kind of crushed with in our societies. And we're like, well, I got to be successful. I got to show off the money. I got to show off the fame. I got to show off I am like a self-made person, all of that kind of stuff. And challenge that and be like, well, do I really want all of this? I mean, I'd like to be accepted, but what are people saying about me? So if I show off the Lamborghini on Instagram, people are going to be like, whoa, this guy needs to compensate. Or whatever, that's the worst of it. The best of it is going to be like, wow, this person's so amazing. But what I'd rather have is, people talking about me saying like, I love Justin. He's such a nice guy. I can't wait to hang out with him again. Developing that skill, of, well, it doesn't matter how I act. What is my natural way of being that just means that people enjoy my presence? Well, adding value, sharing things that I find valuable as well. And so being in groups of like-minded people. So again, let's bring it back. The progressive underloading, virtual assistant, your YouTube channel, YouTube stats, things like that. Sure. It might be necessary now, but imagine future Andrew, 5 years in the future. He's not going to need the virtual assistant to stop him from looking at analytics, because he's going to be like, that's cool. Analytics aren't my thing. And how do we bridge that gap? And how do we train up the skill with progressive overload to get to that place? And a lot of that is just going to be the reminding of yourself of what's real for you, what matters for you.
Yeah.
What are your values? What are you trying to achieve? And recognizing as well, like, oh, I'm falling victim to vanity metrics. Why? Well, clearly I'm seeking some form of validation of accomplishments. I'm seeking, well, remember, if you're the one who's constantly reminding yourself of it, it's not true validation. Like if people that you really love come to you and give you that validation, it's much more delicious, shall we say?
Yeah,
in terms of
absolutely.
Validation,
So Justin, one of my favorite phrases in the world actually is what you resist persists. Absolutely. And what you embrace erase. I say it ad nauseum. My wife rolls her eyes every time. She agrees. She jokingly rolls her eyes. She knows it's true, but I say it a lot, and so it's just a funny thing we have. Something I've, like very specific. We'll just use for the sake of open and honest conversation. Like, sure. I would love to, like, podcast, interview people, provide value, like full time. I'd love to make a business out of this.
Absolutely.
Like that would just be cool. Like it'd be so freaking cool, right? If I could grow the skill, if I could learn how to provide value in mass at scale to hundreds, thousands, millions of people. Is that outcome focused, or is that just like, hey, it would be cool and I'm going to work towards that. That's a goal, but I also just enjoy deep conversations. And so like, I love it anyway. Like, do you think that's unhealthy the way I'm framing that? Or like, because something I've come, again, in terms with that, what you embrace, erase, I'm actually just trying to embrace that. Like I think about the outcomes a lot, and that's okay as long as I love the journey as well. So something I've found, and as I'm just recently embracing like, hey, it's okay that I want things from this as long as I love doing it regardless. Exactly. I'm trying to embrace those feelings, and in a way I feel like they've reduced in their power. They've reduced in their controlling and manipulation over me by just saying it's okay that I want this, but I'm going to try and be worthy of these wants that I have. It's not something I've exactly fleshed out with verbiage yet, but am I making sense there?
Absolutely. And like we can tie this all together and also say this idea of like, so understand your experience with TikTok right now, or like YouTube with analytics. Imagine the pressure when your podcast gets to 100,000 downloads a day. Sure. Imagine the pressure to be able to like people please there. And if you have not developed the skill of resisting the vanity metrics kind of temptations,
Sure.
how powerful that's going to be. And so a lot of it is like, it's a blessing that you're not super popular now. It's a blessing.
Absolutely.
Because that would absolutely psychologically crush anyone who hasn't developed those skills.
It's so true. Damn it, Justin, it's so true.
So consider this. The idea is that I'm not saying that there shouldn't be goals. There absolutely should be, without a doubt. What I think must happen first is like, look, we could all die tomorrow. So let's make it process based. And every now and again, we lift up our heads and we look at the horizon. We say, well, where are we going? Let's make sure that there's a mixture of the destination and the journey. And we're going towards a destination that we find valuable, that we find authentic, etc., that we enjoy, that we want to go to. Yeah. But the journey itself is something that's very difficult to find pleasure in for most people. We don't have that skill in our society to enjoy the journey. And that's why I find that woman I talked about, Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, her broaden and build theory, there are 4 emotions that you can use to practice to make sure that you're enjoying the journey, which is curiosity, to explore, joy, which is like to play. And that means you've got competition, a competitive game that you're playing, but you don't care in the results. You don't care about like who wins or who loses. You just enjoy playing because the person that you're playing with and the game that you're playing is something that you enjoy. Think about it. If you've got, like, let's say you're playing a game of Tekken against your little nephew or niece or something like that. And like, you don't care if they win or lose. You just want to like ham it up for them and enjoy it. Yeah. The third one is savoring, and that's got to do with like almost pausing the moment and looking around the moment and just being like, I love this. I love this. I love this. I love this. And getting into those kind of habits. And really based on that, and the result, you will get a sense of accomplishment with the more you achieve. Like yesterday, my podcast reached 6,000 downloads. So I was like blown away, but it's a vanity metric, and it shouldn't stop the pleasure that I take in each of my podcast recordings and episodes. Yeah.
Is that real? So, did you hit 6,000?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, let's go. Not to bump on the vanity, but dude, I mean, that's How do you interpret that yourself? You see 6,000.
Yep.
And like, how do you take in that statistic? How do you take in that measure and turn it into something positive? Do you just acknowledge like, wow, I've got the skill to get 6,000 and that's cool?
Yeah.
Like, is that how you have to change the verbiage around it to say, hey, oof, I'm getting better at this. I've gotten good enough to earn 6,000 downloads.
I mean, at the end of the day, what we're talking about, especially with podcasting, if you're talking about like the skills of podcasting, a lot of it is the skill of consistency, the skill of being 100%. Excited, by what you're talking about as well. The skill of, there's a certain amount of like search engine optimization and all that kind of stuff so that people can actually find your podcast as well. A certain skill of marketing to be able to like, talk to other people about it. But a large portion of it, actually, the podcast came up for me because I was like, if I die tomorrow, I would like something, a legacy for people to, to take what I've learned and perhaps use it if they could.
And I think about my son a lot. Sons. I have, my second son's yet to be born.
Absolutely.
I kind of think about that. And Joe Rogan is, obviously the quintessential podcaster, right?
Mm-hmm.
But something I've thought about is for his daughters. I think he just has daughters. Like, how cool for those girls that, even as they're growing up and maybe he's still around, that they can go back and look at episode 1 through 1,500 and see the evolution of their father.
Right.
And that's actually something I think about a lot, and I'm getting the chills thinking about it because like it's actually part of the enjoyment I'm getting from this. Like, in 15, 20 years, when my son is in his 20s, and he's struggling, he can go back and be like, what was dad struggling with at this time?
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of comfort of being able to do. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
My dad, I don't know what happened, but he just never opened up. And so when he died, I was actually he had prostate cancer for 2 years, and towards the end he started getting a little bit. You could just hear it in his voice. He was weak, and I actually quit my job and I left my apartment in London. Gave notice, quit my job, and I flew to South Africa to kind of nurse him back to health, so my mom could also take a break and she could go back to work and things like that. And unfortunately, he passed before I arrived in South Africa. But one of my good friends in London actually, he said to me, "You should just go with a list of conversations to have with your dad." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Hey, like what inspired him? What's the thing he's the most proud of in his life? Apart from the obvious, like family and things like that. What was something that he struggled with when he was younger? What was he doing when he was your age?" And getting him to share his life with you. And I remember thinking there was so much that I wanted to know about him as well. And so it comes back, there's that fourth emotion of sharing. Sharing can be involving a person in an action that you're doing is sharing, but then also reporting the actions to a person sharing. And so it's literally the idea of like, okay, cool. Well, I can share my bread with you and that's involving you, or I can tell you, you know what, you need to go and check out this restaurant. It's amazing. And I'm reporting to you. And I wanted my dad to share with me, what he had been through, and being able to just share with people, not just the highs, but the lows as well. Turns out psychologically, that's what actually bonds us together, is like a lot of the shared feelings of we're all going through this terrible thing at this point in time, which is, again, bringing back the suicide attempts that I felt, that I had, the depression, all of that connects me with people now. It doesn't push people away. It doesn't make people don't think, oh, there's something wrong with him. They're like, oh my God, me too. Me too. And it's a big capacity for human connection, which is incredible.
That's really cool.
So think about this. Think about how much could you record where you open up yourself to the larger vulnerabilities of like, what's really difficult for you and how are you thinking about it? I don't know if you've made any solo podcasts yet of just you, waxing lyrical about whatever is awesome in your life right now and what you're appreciating, what's sucking in your life right now, and then also like what's just making you laugh in your life right now as well. And I'm sure that those things, you don't even need to share them. They're just private. And, when your boys are 20, 30 years old, they will hold on to those audios like gold, because I know I would.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm going to tear up thinking about it. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's true. I love that. Emotion. Awesome.
Okay. Yeah, well, just speaking of connection, we're bumping up on time here. Where can people connect with you?
Multiple places, the usual, but I'll just give one, which is going to be the podcast. If you follow the threads of the podcast, you'll find me, and the podcast is Thought Architecture, and that's it. My website is under my name, which is justinnope.com, but it's a lot more difficult to kind of like figure out, how do I spell Nope? Whereas Thought Architecture is like, it's going to pop up on your stream, wherever that is.
Okay.
So, cool.
Okay. Well, Justin, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time, your insight, your wisdom, your struggle, and of all things, sharing it with us. So thank you.
Absolutely. No, thanks for asking great questions and being such an awesome podcast host. And participating has been great for me and sharing this experience. So thank you so much. And I'm fingers crossed. I really hope in 5 years' time, you get booed out by Spotify for like 200 million, man. I'm rooting for you.
Absolutely. Okay.